Allow this old wizard to tell you a tale of my musical history that's rather strange, and you probably wouldn't believe it unless it came from the horse's mouth. So let's go back to the beginning. Like every child, I was kind of delegated to whatever my parents listened to because they had controls of the radio. But thankfully, my parents had good taste in music, so I appreciate that. But in later years, with the invention of these bad boys, Walkmans, it meant that I could get some cassettes and listen to my own music, which I did. Unfortunately, I'm not proud to admit it, the first two cassettes I bought were MC Hammer and Vanilla Ice. Yeah. But because my father then saw I was getting into music, I then got access to his record collection, and that was worth so much more than those two cassettes cost me. Because that means I got access to Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, all the greats, and it was awesome. So at the same time, I had a love of hip hop and a love of a love of rock kick in. And then once I had access to my dad's record collection, because he had quite an eclectic mix, there was a record in there called Popcorn, and that kicked off my love for electronica as well. It was so quirky, and to this day, I just still remember the first time I hearing that. Then again, I still remember the first time I heard Smoke on the Water and War Pigs. That was mind-blowing. So I was 12 years old, or thereabouts, going into high school as a nerdy kid, very nerdy, I was in top classes, with three different genre loves: hip-hop, electronica, and rock. And unfortunately at the time, in the late 80s and early 90s, society was very tribal when it came to music tastes. So the rock guys didn't associate with the hip-hop guys, who didn't associate with the electronica guys. And usually each of those subgenres had different sports associated with them. I loved skateboarding, so there was a lot of hip-hop and a bit of punk in skating. And thankfully, because of bands like Beastie Boys, a couple of hip hop and rock kind of merged a little bit. So that was cool. So in the mid 90s, that's when I started first a punk band with a couple of mates, a couple of nerdy mates. And this was really cool because playing in a punk band, it meant that we got invited to parties we didn't previously get invited to. So that was cool. And also when we went to a lot of all age and underage shows. And at one of those shows in particular, we're seeing the Porkers, which was a punk ska band play. And because I was playing in a band as well, I used to always offer help to carry the equipment, especially the drum gear, because no one likes doing that. And the sooner it's moved, the sooner everyone can get back to partying. And while doing this for a few of the bands, a guy called Marcus Wright saw me do that, and he's gone, "Hey, do you want to be the roadie for our band?" And so I was a 16-year-old, turning 17 shortly year old kid who's now a roadie for a band who's playing up and down the coast. And the real benefit of this meant that I could get into over 18 gigs, being that I was under 18 because I was working with the band. It meant that I just had to lug some gear, and a lot of the time I sat on the door taking tickets. But it gave me the opportunity to watch how the industry kind of works, especially for a small indie touring band. So that was very, very helpful. In conjunction with this, and especially so a few years later, to make a bit of scrap and sustain the music industry, I started DJing a bit. So I did a lot of weddings, and there was a particular pub/club at a rural town that I had played at every Friday night. I mean, it wasn't brilliant work, but there was still money coming in from music. So I still count it. I still count it. Then in the early 2000s, because bands of like Beastie Boys, which merged hip hop and rock, that kind of started breaking down the tribalism that was there at the time. There were a few other bands that did it. There was a lot of rock, heavy rock and electronica being done as well. And at the time where I was working, I became friends with Brad, and we started a band called In the Headset, which was kind of a folk rock, which we merged with electronica. So it was kind of like electronic folk, or I don't know what you'd call it, but it was different. At the time, it was still very different. So we got some haters, but at the same time, we got a lot of notice. And that band was really cool. That band, we played live on radio. We played some competitions. We played heaps of gigs. Like we were gigging at least twice a week. Some nights we'd gig twice in one night. We'd play down the coast, have to quickly pack up, drive up the coast, have no time to ourselves, quickly unpack, play another gig, and then drive home before sunrise. It was it was an enduring time, but I wouldn't change it for the world because there was a lot of good memories. And because we got a lot of radio play and they plugged our shows, it means that it was always fun shows, nice crowds. Unfortunately, around 2005 to 2007, as most people know, the arse end fell out of the music industry. So that means we all went for full-time jobs because we weren't certain of what was going to happen in music. I mean, so we just put it on the back burner for the time being in that band. And unfortunately, we never seemed to pick it back up. Everyone kind of went their own ways and did their own bands. I mean, Steph was playing in another alt-rock band. Brad went to a heavy rock with Shags. And I started producing more and more hip-hop and electronica. So I was using the name of Carcinogenic for hip-hop and Carcinogenesis for electronica. I still kept the circles, my personal network circles, as separate as possible because I still wasn't sure that genre fusion and a big melding pot of genres was going to happen. Thankfully, it has in later years, especially so because of the lockdown in the late 2010s. So let's get into that era and what's coming. So between 2005 and say 2010, even though the arse end had fallen out of the music industry, economically everyone was sitting pretty. No one was really struggling as much, especially by comparison to now. And the music reflected that. So for that 10-year period, there was a lot of happy music and a lot of joyful music because the people were happy. Unlike in the period of the late 80s and early 90s where there was economic crisis and people were miserable. Now, the interesting thing is if you look at the economic climate now, that is the same as what it was in the late 80s and early 90s, which is why I believe there's a big resurgence in alternative music because people are miserable again. And alternative music caters to the miserable. Especially once the lockdown happened, and that's when my music had changed as well. So between, say, 2007 and, say, 2015, I was still making hip-hop music. I was producing it, selling it, giving it away, dabbling in urban arts with the aerosol cans, if you know what I mean. And I was still making electronica under the name of Carcinogenesis, which I was putting out on SoundCloud and a few other places, and still DJing occasionally, not for money, just for shits and giggles. But then came the lockdown periods, and I was already, throughout this whole time, I always noodled on guitar and rocked out, even though it's only been bedroom rocking, which was a step down from where I was a performance rocker, like touring band. So did troughs and peaks throughout every musician's career, and you just got to accept it, I guess. And so that brings me to now. If you look at 2019 onwards, my music started getting really dark and really reflective on society because everyone was miserable. And so the thoughts and feelings that I was having was also the same as everyone else's. We're on the same vibe, and my music was on that vibe as well. And I've continued down that path now because nothing's changed. Until things get happy again, my music won't get happy, nor should it. Good art reflects the society. It is a reflection of the environment around the artist in which the art was created. So the future prediction is exactly that. Unless society comes good, unless there is an economic change, I think music will get darker and darker and more thoughtful and meaningful in the lyrics because that's how way people can express their unhappiness with what's happening at the moment. We'll see less happy tunes, and I think even in electronica we'll start seeing more gloomy, dark music. And what was happy, upbeat before will be less and less. I mean, it will swing back around to happy times once this crisis we're going through corrects itself. How it will correct itself, I'm not entirely sure. But I think something's coming, something big's coming. But once that passes, we'll have a new era of music. I think also the big boys are struggling big time with indie musicians because we're here. They can't stop us. They are trying by banning inclusion to get rid of platforms, but that's not going to work. As songs like mine called Media Lies tells in black and white. All in all, it's been an interesting history, especially my musical path, that is very least taken. Usually it's one person picks a genre and goes all in and goes all out. And I didn't do that. I didn't realize I had Asperger's until I was diagnosed in my mid-30s, which is probably why I've been that way. It explains a lot in hindsight. But we are who we are, such is life. Well, you've heard it from the horse's mouth now. That's my musical history. It is what it is. And I hope your musical history, if you're just beginning, is just as colourful. And you heard a brilliant beginning. And if not, make it so. The world is your oyster. Make it so. Rock on.